On the 19th of May 1536, the swing of an executioner's sword, one of the most iconic women in English history, lost her head within the walls of the Tower of London. Anne Boleyn is seen by many as a woman who would wreck the marriage of Henry VIII to get what she wanted, but she would herself fall sharply from grace. Anne would frustrate Henry with her inability to give the son his greatest wish, a son or a male heir to follow Henry on the throne. But this lack of male heir forced the king to look elsewhere, and he began to see Jane Seymour, one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting, and this was an open secret. But Henry then forced Anne out of the royal apartments and moved Jane in, and Anne's downfall was signalled with her being imprisoned in the Tower of London and charged with adultery and treason. But her execution resulted in a bloody chapter of English history being over. Anne left behind a daughter, whom the king, her husband, was incredibly fond of. Despite Henry never getting the incredibly strong Tudor King he wanted, as his heir and son would die at a young age, he would get this brilliant successor and queen in the form of Anne Boleyn's daughter, Elizabeth, who would become Queen Elizabeth I. But when the axe fell upon Anne, Elizabeth was left without a mother, despite being just 2 years old at the time. But what happened when this young princess was told of the news? It was near to Tower Green, on the scaffold, that Anne Boleyn would lose her head. She'd come to terms with her execution and death, and as she made her way to the scaffold, which had been created near to the White Tower, Anne was noted to have been graceful and walked there with dignity. She didn't seem fearful, and onlookers noted her poised grace. But when she got onto the scaffold, she would be greeted by a French executioner and swordsman. He was brought across from Calais to perform the job of executing a Queen of England. And Henry VIII wanted someone skilled and trustworthy to take the head off his wife, and this was seen as a kind thing for the king to allow, as it was much more reliable than using the commoner's axe, which could often take more than one swing to perform the job. There would be no wooden block, and instead just hay and black velvet on the scaffold to mark the place where a queen would die. This was an execution, but also a funeral at the same time. The time came then for Anne to give a speech, and she said to the onlookers that, "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, for according to the law and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that, whereof I am accused and condemned to die, but I pray God save the king, and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever a good, a gentle and sovereign lord. And if any person will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge the best. And thus I take my leave of the world and of you all, and I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me. To God I commend my soul." A witness also said of the sight that she gracefully addressed the people from the scaffold with a voice somewhat overcome by weakness, but which gathered strength as she went on. She begged her hearers to forgive her if she had not used them all with becoming gentleness, and asked there for prayers. It was needless, she said, to relate why she was there, but she prayed the judge of all the world to have compassion on those who had condemned her, and she begged them to pray for the king, in whom she had always found great kindness, fear of God, and love of his subjects. The spectators could not refrain from tears. Anne then removed her ermine mantle, and she took off her headdress, and then she said goodbye to her ladies, and said prayers before she knelt down and had a blindfold fastened around her eyes by her ladies. She was kneeling upright, and she said her final words, Jesus, receive my soul. O Lord God, have pity on my soul. With this the executioner revealed his large sword and removed his shoes, and the assistant made a sound to summon Anne's attention in one direction, and then from the other the executioner sliced through her neck with the sword. This was an execution with a single stroke, witnessed by people such as Thomas Cromwell, the first Duke of Suffolk Charles Brandon, and the King's illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy. Thomas Cranmer, who heard of the execution, broke down in tears and said, "She who has been the Queen of England on earth today will become a queen in heaven." But then Anne's remains were gathered in an oak chest, and were hastily buried by her ladies in the nearby chapel within the tower's walls. But there was another problem. Anne Boleyn left behind her daughter Elizabeth, who was known as Princess Elizabeth, and would of course become the future Queen, Elizabeth I. But Elizabeth was just 2 years old and 8 months when her mother died on the scaffold, and Anne had been a good mother to her, and she provided for her as best as she could, and even in her final days she purchased clothes for her. Elizabeth last saw Anne, her mother, in January of 1536, following celebrations that were held for the death of Catherine of Aragon. There are reports that exist saying that Anne had established her own household for Elizabeth, and Elizabeth would later be told stories that she was held by her mother when she would be pleading for her life before her arrest in front of her husband, Henry VIII, Elizabeth's father. But Elizabeth was cared for by Sir John and Lady Shelton, and her governess, Lady Bryan. Lady Shelton was the sister of Anne's father, and she was trusted to take good care of her. She was a good carer for the future queen and raised her well, and she would stand up when she was told to treat Mary, Elizabeth's sister, harshly. Following Anne's execution, no one told Elizabeth of her mother's death. But she knew something was wrong, and she knew that her lifestyle was changing, and her title changed, and how she was addressed. She would once ask, "How hath it? Yesterday my lady princess, and today but my lady Elizabeth." We don't really know how Elizabeth reacted to the news when she was told. She probably did not have as much attachment to her mother as someone would nowadays, due to being raised in the royal nursery and by others. Lady Bryan and Lady Shelton were probably the two women Elizabeth regarded in a more of a maternal, mothering manner. It's believed that Thomas Cromwell had also visited Elizabeth's household after the execution of Anne to tell of the new expectations with regards to Elizabeth's position. There had been no money allocated for her lifestyle and needs, and this even included clothing, and Elizabeth had outgrown all of her clothes. With this, Lady Bryan had to appeal to Cromwell, and she said, "My lord, when your lordship was last here, it pleased you to say that I should not mistrust the king's grace, nor your lordship, which word was more comfort to me than I can write, as God knoweth, and now it boldeneth me to show you my poor mind. Now, so it is, my Lady Elizabeth is put from the degree she was afore, and what degree she is at now, I know not, but why, hear a say. Therefore I know not how to order her, nor myself, nor none of hers that I have the rule of, that is, her women and her grooms, beseeching you to be a good lord to my lady and to all hers, and that she may have some raiments. For she hath neither groan, nor kirtle, nor petticoat, nor no mantle of linen, nor frocks more, nor kerchiefs, nor sleeves, nor rails, nor body stitches, nor muffias, nor biggins. All these her grace's mostook, or needs, I have driven off as long as I can, that by my troth I cannot drive it no longer, beseeching you, my lord, that you will see that her grace may have that is needful for her, as my trust is ye will do, and I may know from you by writing how I shall order myself, and what it is the king's grace's pleasure, and yours, that I shall do in everything." Sir John Shelton would also communicate this, and he said in another letter to Cromwell that, I perceive by your letters the king's pleasure that my Lady Elizabeth shall keep her chamber and not come abroad, and that I shall provide for her as I did for my Lady Mary when she kept her chamber. Have me in remembrance for the king's warrant you commanded me to deliver to Master Wriothesley for money for the household, otherwise I cannot continue it. It was clear the king was punishing his daughter because she was the offspring of his second wife, and Elizabeth made the king uncomfortable at times. Every time he saw her, he was reminded of Anne Boleyn, and when there were suggestions to bring the young princess to court, Henry banned this, as used Anne Boleyn as the excuse. But it would be the other wives of Henry VIII who would be of great use to Elizabeth, such as Catherine Parr. Henry was clearly punishing his daughter, and he was a brutal man who would not hesitate to order more bloodshed. But he did love his daughter, it's believed, and whilst Anne was alive, he was known to play with her. But she reminded the king of his ill-fated second wife. But Elizabeth would become the greatest monarch of the Tudor period, and it's possible that everything she went through made her very strong. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.